Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 18th of June 2024. Let's just remind ourselves of what the lines on the map mean. Please check out the screen, pause the video if you don't know what they mean, and thank you very much to JL who's done the mapping again today. What a legend. Okay. So, as you can see, not a lot of change to the entire front line. There's a small change to Syriac maps down on Dnipro River. We'll have a look at that in a bit. Some changes in the Avdiivka direction. But yesterday we had pins all over the shop. That was partly to do with Syriac maps being back on the scene, partly to do with him doing quite a lot of jiggery pokery throughout yesterday. That was also topical to yesterday and the day before, but I think a lot of changes into the grey zone that meant that there were just a lot of pins everywhere. It's, as you can see, a lot calmer today, which is good news for the Ukrainians. Now, we're going to start up in the Kharkiv direction where there are no changes to the mapping as according to all three mappers, but we can see there are some sources to discuss goings on in this area. So first of all, we're going to go to someone who I believe is actually fighting one of these units up there. This is Kriegsforscher, a source on Twitter. Says, the only thing I can say about the battle for Vovchansk, that's only the beginning. I think we have here a new record, 13 guided bombs carb for 1 hour. It's hard for them right now to stop our advance and they're deploying new forces. About that and more below. So he starts a thread. Now, as far as guided glide bombs, these carb bombs are, as far as these are concerned, frankly speaking, the only reason I'm writing this is Russian guided bombs pain in the ass. Yesterday, from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night, they dropped 13 bombs. And from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, 6 more bombs. If you're asking yourself whether that's a lot or not, it's huge. So these are significant bombs. They have precision in the main, and they pack quite a lot of punch, and they're absolutely hammering Vovchansk with that, as the Ukrainians are, right? They're using hammer bombs, but not as many of them. So the Russians have a lot of these to use, and they're using them quite widely. Now, the implication I get from this, so my inference is that they are struggling to win the battle on the ground, and so they're resorting to smashing the Ukrainians from the air. So the Ukrainians really need to do something about the planes that release those bombs, and then we get back to discussions about ATACMS being used to hit air bases within Belgorod Oblast. That would be very useful. This thread will be short and kind of more technical than previous ones. 1. Russians are using only infantry without armoured vehicles. This is something we've heard a lot about in the Kharkiv Oblast, that basically most of these attacks in these two different sectors are essentially infantry-led attacks. The Russians have lost relatively small numbers of equipment here compared to what we've seen elsewhere. Right, they have lost some equipment, and it seems to be growing a little bit in pace. The first week of this offensive up here, the Russians attrited more Ukrainian equipment than the Russians lost. That's also a lot to do with their use of Lancets in the area that are hitting Ukrainian artillery hitting further back from the contact line. So yeah, the Lancets are useful. They are having an effect, but also the Russians just are simply not using a lot of mechanized equipment. This chap here says Russians are using only infantry without armored vehicles. Only a couple of tanks and AFV were destroyed here. My company destroyed 2 out of 5 BMPs. Yes, I'm showing off. These were destroyed by the 82nd Brigade, so he's providing some pictures of that. Another one damaged and abandoned BMP2. Folks from my company used 4 FPVs against it. So that's interesting. Shows you how many FPV drones they can take to disable vehicles. Remember, we heard that maybe 10 to 20% of FPVs are successful, but of course that success of those 10 to 20% could be multiple hits on the same vehicle. So actually, rather than saying needing 5 to 10 drones to hit one thing, you actually might need more drones, since actually a success might be 3 FPV, 4 FPV drones hitting the same vehicle, if you get my maths there. In which case you might be talking about 40 drones at one vehicle. Right, I think that's probably a little bit extreme, but you get the point. That there's a lot of drones that you don't hear about because they miss, get jammed, etc., etc. Their choice to use infantry without armour is strange, but was predicted by myself, he says, by me, and because of that, they have big losses in infantry. Just seeing what else is useful to talk about here. The armoured vehicles of the 30 Mechanised Regiment, not BMPs, which are perfect for fighting in the city, at least for evacuation, but they didn't do this. So, there's an opportunity to use these vehicles, and effectively so, in an urban environment, but they don't use them. Second, the Russian armed forces use drones as much as they can every hour, even at night. They use 8 to 12 Orlan, Supercam, and Zax drones. I don't know if that's supposed to be Zal or is that Zax. Anyway, these are your reconnaissance drones, fixed-wing drones. They started using more helicopters since the beginning of the operation. They almost haven't done it, but right now the number is increasing. And that's a destroyed Russian UR-77. That might be, I don't know if that's one that uses the like Miklik equivalent, the mine clearing, but I don't know. Anyway, that's interesting because actually we haven't heard too much about helicopters ever since Ukraine hit those bases in Berdyansk and Luhansk, those air bases that had helicopters with ATACMS. They are preparing, so fourth point is they're preparing new forces for future advances. For example, the 22nd Regiment of 72nd Division, newly created, is going to receive BMP-3s, BMP-1AMs and BMP-2s in general, 60 armoured fighting vehicles and waiting to be deployed at the battlefield, he says. As I said a lot of time ago, they are still trying to dig and build a new defence line at newly occupied territory. Fortunately, they failed to do it. The point here is that the Ukrainians are doing quite a good job of destroying Russian engineering vehicles that are digging trenches behind the lines in the Vovchansk area and back behind Lyubimka. These are to allow the Russians to dig in and defend their positions. But it's being quite expensive in terms of losing those engineering vehicles. And then sixthly, as I said, for 5 weeks, they've lost 5 BMPs, and instead of mechanized column charges, I see how they use infantry. A couple of days ago, they used 17 paratroopers from the 83rd Brigade with the help of the 82nd mortar, or 82mm mortar. 4 were killed in action and 10 were wounded in action, so that's 14 taken out of 17 paratroopers. That's pretty much in line with some of the statistics we've been seeing or hearing about concerning the high numbers of casualties in the area. And 7, I also was surprised to find out that they almost do not fire from the closed firing positions within their tanks because the tankers don't know how to do that. It's a very big contrast with the Donetsk Oblast. So this could then, so when they are using mechanized equipment, they're not using it very well, or they don't know how to use tanks effectively. And this could come down to poor training, a lack of training because tank crews are being attrited so badly, and maybe they're not being trained for long enough back in Russia. And whereas on the Donetsk front, there are but more experienced tank crews. It could be that up here, as we've heard, they've had people fresh from the training ground up here. It could be that also applies to mechanized equipment crews. And then you've got damaged MTLBs there. They are trying to use more fresh forces from different parts of the front. Assault battalions from the 155th Marine Brigade, so we heard about that from southern Donetsk Oblast. Marine Battalion, the 810th from Zaporizhia Oblast, and Battalion Tactical Group, the first one since 2022, of the 9th Mechanized Brigade south of Donetsk Oblast. So that's interesting. Firstly, they deployed one assault battalion from the 83rd Brigade. It suffered losses, and they deployed the rest of the brigade. The battalion tactical group from the 9th Brigade consists of 3 mechanised companies, 3 assault companies, and 2 assault companies, prisoners. And it's only about Vovchansk area where 116th Brigade of their National Guard and the newly created 128th Mechanised Brigade are deployed. Near Lipsy, the situation is even more interesting. As I said, we destroyed 2 BMPs with the help of mining, and I will show you how we did it, so on and so forth. So talks you through all that kind of stuff. But interesting that there's a lot of talk there about newly created groups and also groups that are pulled from other places on the front line. So this smacks of kind of a bit of, I don't know, is it fair to call it a bit of a rush job? There was talk about how they ended up going in here before they were ready. I've heard that before, but yeah, interesting. Claims that they are pulling troops from elsewhere along the front line. But then we hear, and we'll come to this rumor, or not rumor, claim in a little while, that the Russians have built up a force of 10,000 to attack in this northeastern axis, to attack from sort of Svatova direction towards Borova there on the Oskil River. But we'll come to that in a second. Just a couple more points on this northern area. So, no report said, in addition to our previous reports regarding Lyobike in the Kharkiv direction, more Ukrainian sources now confirm that Ukrainian forces, the 13th Brigade and 92nd Brigade, are advancing inside the settlement, cleaning up more and more houses and streets. And here we have a map to sort of back up that claim, or go alongside with that claim. So this might have been what we had last night. We did have some movement on the map last night in the Lyobike area. We can see the two blue lines here denote the grey zone between the Russian defensive line and the Ukrainian defensive line, and that they're pushed the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back into Lyobike. It's mainly a grey zone now, and the claim there is that the Russians are being pushed out of the settlement. So there you go, and we've gone through that source. Now, no more to mention about this area other than it's pretty tough fighting and lots of guided glide bombs being used. Haven't heard any more about the group of Russians that are surrounded in this aggregates factory or plant. I don't know if the Russians have been able to get them out or what's happened there. No more news today. So then we come down to the northeastern axis, where there are no changes to the front line, but there's a lot of talk about. So if you look at Svatova here, that's halfway down the axis, where you've got the P66, R66 highway that comes up here, and then just west of Svatova, you've got the Novohayarivka. It's a tiny village here. Really, you call it the Ryahorodka area. A few of these villages were taken over as the Russians attacked two in the westerly direction, taking lots of land quite quickly, and then the Ukrainians managed to stall them and push them back slightly, and it stayed there now for, I can't remember how long, a couple of months, maybe a bit more. And then north of them, more recently, the Russians have had some success going towards Stelmakivka, in these places, Andriivka, another Andriivka, Gyarelny, and Myasozharivka there. Okay, so you got two sort of areas where they've had some success recently, but the rumours are coming out, or claims are coming out from Deep State predominantly. Deep State reports that Russian forces have built up significant military strength to attack Borova from Ryahorodka to Novovodyanye. So Ryahorodka is here. Novovodyanye is down here. So it's more the southerly area rather than that Stelmakivka sector. So down here you've got maybe 10,000 troops and 200 vehicles is a claim, and they'll be moving up towards Borova. But remember, last time they tried this to get to Borova, they got, I mean, we'll measure this. So this is where the starting line was. That's where they got to. Actually, they got a bit further and they got pushed back, but they took 4 kilometers, and that was the end of that. Now they're looking to go a little bit further, another 22 kilometers. And you think, yeah, you've got to do a pretty good job to do that. I'm fairly sure the Ukrainians are quite well defended back here. Now, whether it's to get to Borova, or whether it's to take Luhansk, so the remainder of the Donbass area requires them taking quite a lot of territory down in Donetsk. So Donetsk, this blue line, broadly denotes Donetsk Oblast. They have an awful lot more of Donetsk to take, well, and that includes Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk, etc., etc. Okay, that's beyond the Russians. But the Donbass region is made up of Luhansk and Donetsk, and Luhansk, they have most of Luhansk. So this is all Luhansk area. You've got the city of Luhansk there. This is all Luhansk, and the rest of the Luhansk Oblast would require them taking land broadly, just this amount of land there, and then a little bit down here by Novelsky. So if you can see that white dotted line, it goes up and around there, and then up here. Okay, so yes, they might be going towards Borova, or it might just be a concerted effort to take the whole of Luhansk, and then they can say eventually, yes, we've got the whole of Luhansk. But even then, they've not been doing a particularly good job of taking and maintaining, of taking ground without losing stupendous amounts of stuff. So anyway, approximately 10,000 personnel of 450 pieces of heavy equipment. Sorry, I said 200. It's 200 artillery systems, including, so that's 200 artillery systems and 250 other pieces of heavy equipment have been amassed, according to Deep State. The 3rd Brigade is currently defending. It's that 3rd Assault Brigade again. They were up in Kharkiv. Have they come out there already, defending against these forces? Last year, Russia also tried to attack in this area, but at some point they halted operations without achieving success, which is what I was talking about. Now, Euromaidan Press also talks about this, coming from Deep State. Russian forces advance on Borova in Luhansk Oblast with tanks, mercenaries, artillery, say the Ukrainian military. Yes. Is there anything else to add to what we said? The enemy is intensifying attacks to reach the borders of the Luhansk region. So that's one. The borders of Luhansk isn't necessarily Borova, but they also talk about here defenders of the 3rd Assault Brigade, separate assault brigade, confirmed that the enemy intensified its activities in the Luhansk region. It's attempting to capture the settlements, a couple of Posha Travneve, Chernischina, and plans to take over the village of Borova. Okay, but here later on, the front line is talking about getting Luhansk. So just to remind you, Luhansk, there's Chernischina. That's what they're talking about, and that would give them all of Luhansk. But Borova is quite a big step further on. But anyway, the frontline strip of the 3rd Assault Brigade in the Kharkiv region, which borders the Luhansk region, is currently one of the areas where the enemy advances most intensively. The occupiers' immediate task is to advance towards those two settlements with further capture of Borova settlement. So that's what they're claiming. And then Noel reports and says later, this is the latest one, coming directly from the 3rd Assault Brigade, quote, the enemy has intensified attacks to reach the borders, etc. Like we just heard, the 3rd and 144th Divisions of Russia's 20th Army, along with a tank regiment, artillery, private military companies and special forces are leading the offensive. So a whole range of troops and equipment. That's something to look out for over the next few days. This could end up being one of the major hot points on the front line. I guess we'll have to see. Suffice to say that many other areas of the front line have seen no changes to the mapping, but it could be, that maybe Andrew Perpetua Deep State have got another update to do, or Surat Maps has got another, or so on and so forth. But at the moment, when JR did the mapping, we only had Deep State having made the changes from yesterday, although there was a change on Surat Maps. We'll come to that in a second. So yeah, no change to Chasiv Yar, to the west of Bakhmut, which I think is incredibly significant. The Ukrainians done just a superb job of stopping the Russians. This, like I was talking about with Greg last night in the live stream, this was an area where the battalion commander in Chasiv Yar had said to Greg, actually directly in person, that they had expected to lose this by the end of the summer. That's now looking unlikely, which is a phenomenal state of affairs. The Ukrainians done a really good job of stopping them there, and the Russians have failed to make any gains in Klishchivka. Coming down the Seversk front line, we get not Seversk front line, sorry, coming down from Bakhmut to the Avdiivka salient, we can see that the Russians have made, as according to Deep State maps, some small gains north of Ocheratina, west of Arkhangelska, and then some beneath Novoalexandriivka. This is a worrying area, and this is talked about today in a few sources about how close that is to the T0504, I think this is, which is... that's a road that goes through Ivanivska. So that's the one that comes through there. The T0504 through Ivanivska in the Chasiv Yar area goes all the way down here through Konstantinivka and then on the way to Pokrovsk. So it's an important logistical route that is at the moment getting peppered. It's been closed to the general public. It's been attacked by the Russian artillery. They can hit it. Whether it means it's under fire control, I don't know how often and how accurately they can, but it's going to be a dangerous place. And the Ukrainians will, the chances of pushing the Russians back here are going to be slim to none at the moment. But they would certainly want to do that because the Russians are inching ever closer and really threatening the Ukrainian logistics there. Okay, let's look at a few sources. So the British intelligence said of this area today, Russian forces have likely taken control of the village of Novoalexandriivka. We'll just have a look at that. That's this northern, northwesterly one. And it's the area where they're moving, as I say, towards that T0504 highway. So they've taken control of that village. Just to continue. Located approximately 20 kilometers north of Avdiivka, Donetsk Oblast, the area has seen heavy fighting throughout 2024, and Russia has been gradually advancing since capturing Avdiivka in February. By taking control of Novoalexandriivka, Russia moves closer to threatening the T0504 road, one of the main supply routes for Ukrainian forces further east. It is highly likely the village of Vodzivijenka will be Russia's next objective as it seeks to sever the road and disrupt Ukrainian logistics. And that's absolutely, makes a lot of sense. That's going to be the next objective for Ukraine there. I'd expect the Russians to be, next objective for Russia there. I expect the Ukrainians to be under a lot of pressure in that sector going forward. Okay, so moving on from there, just a few other sources. We've got Surrey maps here. This is a very recent one, but I haven't had a chance yet to check whether this is a change they have made after, I don't know, a change they've made after, or a tweet they made after they made the changes. Just trying to find Novelska. So let's have a look. We've got them controlling half of that settlement, and here we have I think that could actually be already on the map at the moment. Yep, looks that way. So that's good news that actually this isn't an update that needs doing. The map is correct as far as Surrey Maps has said, and this was a late tweet after the changes made yesterday. But anyway, situation northwest of Donetsk, the Russian army advanced along the southern part of Karlivska Reservoir and north of Netailove. In addition, Russian forces re-entered the locality of Novelska at the end of April. My goodness, so that's quite a long time ago. But there you go. Some advances along the reservoir here and getting into Novelsky, which is a shame because that was a useful place for the Ukrainians to keep hold of. It's very well fortified, only a very small agricultural settlement, but the Russians have finally sort of broken through there. And then no changes to the rest of the eastern front line or the southern front line. Just going to go to another claim about Krasnohorivka, but again I think that was that was on yesterday's mapping, so I'll leave that for the time being. We'll just come down to Dnipro River, where what I'll have to do is get rid of these contested lines that tell you where the grey zone is between the two Andrew Perpetua lines, but because on the river area it gets really, really confusing. There are blue lines everywhere. Right, so here we have Surat maps saying actually the Russians aren't right at the left bank of the Dnieper at the Antonivsky Bridge, which is, I think, significant. I was talking about this briefly with Greg last night, and he said, the Russians would have wanted to attack here because that woman walked all the way across the bridge. The bridge is half destroyed, and it's not a walk. You've got to climb down it and up it, and that's hellishly dangerous, I would have thought, even without the fact that there are going to be drones flying around aiming at you. She walked across there with a Ukrainian passport from the occupied area, and that was it went a little bit viral type thing. And you know what the Russians are like, they would have seen that and gone, right, we need to take some land back. So it could have been in answer to that video that they've tried to push back here, or simply because the Ukrainians have arguably pulled back from the left bank completely. But nonetheless, there is a rejigging of the mapping by Surat Maps there. So interesting to note that. Right, that's the end of the Frontline update for today. Hopefully that was of interest. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.